Hello and welcome to a brand new day of free-to-play here on Magic the Gathering Real Life. Get the dish on the latest with me, Lord Rumfish. So this is the multicolor part of the series. I've been talking about all the cards in Defense of Veldmar. The second expansion of Veldmar block, something I've designed myself. And multicolor cards are pretty exciting. Let's go ahead and get in here. This is a Risen Spite. So this is white, black, green, and a colorless. It's a rare sorcery. Return target permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield. And that's pretty excellent. 4 mana is a great price to reanimate something. They don't like to print 4 mana reanimate spells very much anymore. And it can get any permanent card. So it doesn't have to be a big creature. It could be a big artifact, a planeswalker, enchantment, whatever you like. It could even be a land. So I think this card will see constructed play. And further down the line, I might try to introduce a new constructed format. We'll get there eventually. But yeah, if this was being played in Standard, this card would almost certainly see play in Reanimators. For Limited, though, the card is fine in Limited. There's nothing wrong with it. But it's not as easy to set up, throwing the right card into the graveyard and getting like a good mana advantage in Limited. So sometimes you can pull that off, but sometimes this is also just a card you play later in the game, and maybe it gets back like the best creature in your graveyard. That might not be any better than like a 4 or 5 or 6 mana card. It basically doesn't have as much impact in Limited as it does in Constructed. So whereas in Constructed, this is a great card, enables a whole strategy. In Limited, this card's probably more like a 2.5. It's fine, but it doesn't even necessarily make the cut. Aspect of Chaos. This is blue, black, red, green, and 2 colorless. So those are the colors of the Far Realm faction, everything but white. We have a legendary creature, Horror. It has an 8/5 mythic rare. It has flying, lifelink, menace, and trample. So pretty good suite of keywords there. And when this dies, you breach. So that means you'll shuffle your library, banish one, that's exiling the top card. If it's a land, put it on the battlefield. If it's a spell, cast it without paying its mana cost. And since it's breach, you're going to do that twice when it dies. So this is, it's kind of here as a nod to Commander a little bit. I don't do a lot of designing for Commander, but it feels like a really lost opportunity that if I have a 4-color faction, I wouldn't have at least one legendary creature as part of that faction. So that's kind of the reason why this is here. I think it would be fine in Constructed. It's big and threatening. It can't close the game immediately with haste, though. The benefits on the death trigger are really good. The opponent can play around it by exiling it. So I think this card is strong, but it has counterplay to it. So yeah, I think it's fine and constructed. In Limited, it's a bomb. It's something that the opponent really must get rid of. And if they find a way to trade with it in combat, which is going to be hard, being a flying menace creature, it's still going to give you double breach. So in Limited, this is rightfully a mythic rare. It would swing the game dramatically in your favor. So even though this is a lot of colors, I think this would be a strong draw to pull you into all those colors. It's between a 4 and a 4.5 for limited. I'm tempted to lean towards 4.5. You do have to warp the deck quite a bit to get the mana to cast it. Bastion Golem. This is a red, green, white, and X. It's an artifact creature golem. It's a 1/1 mythic rare. It enters the battlefield with twice X +1/+1 counters on it. So, for example, if you paid 4 mana total, this will be a 3/3. 5 mana, it'll be a 5/5. 6 mana, it'll be a 7/7. It'll keep going up by 2 every mana above that. It has first strike and lifelink. So even though its body doesn't really catch up to its mana cost until you get to 5, it has good keywords to where it can often fend off a lot of other things in combat because of the first strike. It's very stabilizing from the lifelink. And when it enters the battlefield, you create X01 colorless wall artifact creature tokens with Defender. So, at 4 mana, you make 1 little wall. 5 mana, you make 2 little walls. This creates a lot of battlefield presence for you when it comes out, as long as you're playing, as long as you're paying about 5 or more mana into it. This should be a pretty stabilizing presence. Even if they have a removal spell for this, the other little blockers it's putting out for you should buy you time. So this looks a little silly, but I think it's actually pretty good. It doesn't exactly just die to removal because it leaves behind these walls. And from 5 mana and on up, it's a giant creature that's nigh impossible to kill in combat. So I think it's actually pretty solid. I think it's, playable and constructed. In limited, this thing's a powerhouse. They've got to have removal. Otherwise, all you can really do is chump block it turn after turn, waiting to draw removal. And meanwhile, your opponent is gaining a ton of life. So, I think this card's very powerful. I would give it, let's call it a 4.5 in limited. It's, especially if you're in Roka, because of all the extra artifacts it can produce. Big ideas. This is green, blue, red, and 3 colorless. It's a rare enchantment. At the beginning of each end step, create an XX blue illusion creature token where X is equal to the number of cards you have drawn that turn. So, interesting stuff going on with this one. For example, if it's the opponent's turn and you didn't trigger some way to draw a card, it is going to produce a 0/0, which would die, which maybe could trigger other stuff for you, especially if you've mixed Quel'Nai and gone 5 colors into Nullfear. I mean, it'd be ridiculous because that's all 5 colors, right? That's taking white, black, green and mixing it with blue, red, green. But if you have things that like to see creatures dying, that could be interesting. Or if you have an Anthem effect that can give your creatures extra toughness for any reason, then producing 0/0s could still be making your board go wide. But if you're doing what you're supposed to with this card, which is playing into Quel'Nai College and their theme of card draw matters, then you're putting out these big token creatures. Anywhere from a 0/0 on the opponent's turn if you haven't drawn, up to however many cards you can manage to draw in a single turn. So it's unlikely to make like sixes and stuff like that. You're not likely to draw that many cards at once. Maybe in constructed. If you try to build a constructed deck around this, maybe you can make it work. In limited, I think it's going to be a game finisher. It's at least going to produce a 1/1 at the end of each of your turns. But if you're doing the Quelnai College thing, you can be like, tapping to discard and draw, or to draw and discard with your looters, your rummagers. There's a bunch of spells in the format that can draw and discard for you and filter spells. There's a bunch of cantrips. Draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. And that makes it more possible to draw cards on the opponent's turn to trigger big ideas. If you're doing all of that, then this is, making potentially a creature on your turn and a creature on the opponent's turn. And it won't take too long of that before you've gone very wide on the board and the opponent gets overrun with all of your ideas. In limited, I would say it's clunky if you're not Quelnai. So this is really for the archetype that wants it, not so much for other people. So if you're in Quelnai, this is a pretty great payoff card, and I would say it's like a 4 if you're in that deck. And if you're not in Quelnai, this is a very clunky way to get like a 1/1 at the end of your turn for 6 mana. That's technically long-term value, but not worth the cost. Occasionally it'll be a 2/2 or a whatever. If that's all you're doing, then this is probably no better than a 1. Bitter Priestess. So this is a white, black, green creature vampire cleric. She is a 3/3, she's rare. She has flying and lifelink, and that by itself would be good enough for limited. 3/3 for 3, flying and lifelink, yeah, that's fine. But also, when Bitter Priest enters the battlefield, I need to change the words on the text box here to see Priestess. You banish 1, that's exiling the top card of your library. Then you return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So she does the Gravedigger thing, but she has very effective stats. A 3/3 flying lifelinker is nothing to sneeze at, and one that regrows a creature from your graveyard to your hand is excellent. You have value, and you have this lifelink flying threat. So I would say probably good in constructed and also great in limited. This card is probably worthy of a rating of 4 at least. Brood Dragon. This is black, red, green, and 3 colorless. We have a 5/6 rare dragon. It has death touch and flying. When Brood Dragon enters the battlefield, create a 0/1 red dragon egg creature token with defender that has, when this creature dies, create a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying. So it's a pair of bodies, one of which is, a giant game-ending threat, but the other one of which the opponent needs to be careful how they deal with it, or when it dies, it just turns into another giant flying creature. So if you sacrifice the egg, or if you chump block with the egg, and if it doesn't get exiled when it dies, then you're going to get a total of 9 power and 10 toughness out of this one card. So it's good value. I'm not sure how it'll be in constructed. I want to say it's good enough. I think it's pretty good value. So I would be inclined to say, yeah, give it a shot in constructed. In limited, of course, This is fantastic in limited. Um, so for limited, yeah, we'll call this. How about a 4.5? Consortium Mage. This is white, blue, black, red, everything but green. It is a 3/6 elf wizard at uncommon. He has flying and vigilance. Whenever you cast an artifact, battle, enchantment, instant, or sorcery spell, draw a card. Then if you control a forest, discard a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. So this has got one of the guardrail mechanics where you're supposed to be 4 colors but not 5. So if you're in the consortium, don't play forests. If you're in the far realm, don't play plains. As far as the effectiveness of this card, this is a very high toughness flyer, and not bad power for its mana cost. You get a great payoff for most of your non-creature spells, but some of them can be creatures. You know, there are artifact creatures in the set, and that can be paying you off. So if you're in this archetype of the consortium, I think this is at least a very solid card for you. I'm going to call it a 3.5. And if you're anyone else, yeah, it depends on if you can cast this or not. And it's obviously not as good if you have forests. So it's probably fine, you know, as a giant flying, vigilant creature. And even if you're discarding cards to where this is a loot effect, that's still okay. It's just a question of if you can cast it or not. So because the mana cost is so clunky on this, I'd be inclined to call it 2 if you're not in the right deck. Crushing Victory. This is white, blue, black, red, and 5 colorless. It's 9 mana. It's a mythic rare sorcery. You deal 8 damage to any target. You create 2 4/4 blue elemental creature tokens with flying. Target opponent discards 2 cards, then you draw 2 cards, and you gain 8 life. So this is a ton of value for a lot of mana. In that regard, it's a little bit like Cruel Ultimatum or the giant spell from Strixhaven that was blue-red. This is kind of in that vein. If you cast this, you will probably end up winning the game. It's not guaranteed, but it's very likely. It's just a question of if you can get to 9 mana and all of these colors. I think the spell is pretty great. I think it's worth the trouble, but I don't think everyone's going to be able to do it. I'm going to rate the spell a 4 just because of the difficulty of getting to it to cast it. Davramos, Transmuter. This is green, white, blue. We have a legendary creature, Elf Wizard. He is a 1/5 mythic rare. And he has the ability tap, exile 2 cards from your hand. Exile target artifact, creature, or planeswalker. That permanent's controller creates one of the following tokens at random. A 0/1 green sheep creature token, a 2/2 colorless reflection creature token, a 1/3 green elf creature token with tap add green, or a treasure token. So this is a competent blocker. 5 toughness for 3 mana is pretty good. And it can change your excess cards into removal spells, but you still leave the opponent most of the time with a creature. Or, in some cases, a treasure token. And you always come down on cards to use his ability. It always takes 2 cards to activate him. So this spell is good. I don't know that you can necessarily grind out what the opponent's doing by going in for a card disadvantage all the time with his activation. But if you use him sparingly and only hit their best stuff with it and kind of pace yourself, I think you could build a whole battle strategy around this guy. Could have applications in Constructed. For Limited, I think it's definitely strong. Since he's a good blocker early and he has this ability, I would say this is a pretty strong pull into Zarnik. So I'm gonna give him a 4. He might be better than that, but since you have to always come in for card disadvantage for his ability, I'm gonna be a little cautious in my rating. I'm gonna give him a 4. So we're gonna look at a bunch of battles now. A lot of them start with the word defense. This first one is Defensive Death Canyon. So this is white, black, green, and a colorless. It's a battle siege. It's an uncommon. You can read all this in the box over here if you don't want to crank your head sideways. When Defensive Death Canyon enters the battlefield, create 3 2/2 black zombie creature tokens with Decayed. Decayed came from Innistrad about 3 years back. So Decayed zombies can't block, and when they attack, you sacrifice them at end of combat. It has 4 defense. It's not loyalty, it's defense. And if you deal that damage to the battle and you flip it over, you cast the backside of it for free, which is Unrelenting Zombies. So Unrelenting Zombies is a white, black, green creature zombie. It's a 4/4, uncommon still. Whenever another creature you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Unrelenting Zombies and you gain 1 life. So if you're doing what the Nulvir want you to be doing, you're going to be growing the zombies because you're an aristocrats kind of deck. Also, the Decayed zombie tokens are going to be dying if they attack, and that can trigger this mode on the card as well. Overall, this card's a little bit more aggressively slanted, and this is more of a value-oriented format. Still, I think this card's pretty good. It's something you definitely want to try to flip over. So, if you're in the deck that wants this, then this is probably worthy of about a 3.5 at least. And for other people, the zombies that can't block, you might or might not be able to go wide and flip this thing over. It might not be quite as easy for you. So for other people, I might think this is like a 2.5. Still a decent card. Defense of Myersong River. This is a black, a red, a green, and 1 colorless. It has a battle siege. It has 3 defense. It's uncommon. When this enters the battlefield, banish cards until you reveal 2 land cards. So you're just exiling off the top until you hit 2 lands. Put 1 onto the battlefield tapped, and the other into your hand. If you banished 1 or more creature cards with mana cost 6 or more this way, put 1 of those creature cards into your hand. So you're guaranteed to hit 2 lands with this. If you happen to hit a giant creature card with it, you can also get 1 of those. This is for the Ulthrak, and if you're doing the Ulthrak thing, where they care about creatures with mana cost 6 or more, this is taking you from 4 mana to 6 mana. Puts 1 land into play directly, the other one's in your hand, so you can play it out the next turn, and you'll be at 6 mana. So that is what the Ulthrak wants. And then this battle only has 3 loyalty, sorry, defense. Yeah, it's not that hard to flip over. When you do, you get Strange Harmony, a black-red-green enchantment. Whenever Strange Harmony enters the battlefield, or you cast a spell with mana cost, sorry, a creature spell with mana cost 6 or more, you gain 2 life and create a quintessence token. So you get 1 trigger of it right away, and then you get more triggers of it if you're playing giant creatures. The life gain is nice. The quintessence can either give you colorless mana when you sacrifice it, or you can pay 2 generic and sacrifice it to draw a card, kind of like a clue token. Either way, there's a ton of value baked into the backside of this. So the front side has given you 2 cards in the form of lands. The back side is giving you at least 1 card from the quintessence token. And if you start triggering it more, it'll pay you off even more than that. So if you're doing what Ulthrak wants you to do, it's being an engine card that takes you to 6 mana and then gives you the tools to start winning the game. I think this is pretty great for the right archetype. So if you're in Ulthrak, we'll call this at least 3.5. This is definitely something you want to be looking at. And for anyone else, if they don't need the mana quite as much, then they won't be able to trigger the backside of it as easily. Then, I could imagine the Far Realm using it. You just add blue onto this, and it's they like to go kind of big on their mana costs as well. But for anyone else, this is probably more like a 2. Defense of Pelfarum. This is red, green, white, and 3 colorless. Battle Siege. It's uncommon. It has 5 defense. When it enters the battlefield, create a 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature token. Then deal X damage to up to 1 target creature, where X is the number of artifacts you control. So this is through and through a payoff card for the Roka Guild. So if you are Roka and you've been building up your artifact count, by the time you get to 6 mana, this will probably kill their best creature and give you a 3/3. Then maybe you can attack in and flip this over. 5 loyalty or defense is a lot, but it turns into Wrought Iron Golem. So we have a colorless artifact creature golem. It's a 5/6. It has Rampage 2 and Trample. Rampage 2 means for each creature that blocks it beyond the first one, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So one thing blocks it, Rampage doesn't trigger, but 2 or more things block it, it starts getting bigger. You can also pay 3 and sacrifice an artifact to put a +1/+1 counter on Wrought Iron Golem. So that can be a payoff for your Artifact Matters theme. But there are other cards that Roka plays that care about the number of artifacts in play. So there's a tension built into the Wrought Iron Golem of whether you want to keep sacrificing things to it or not, because it can make some of your other cards worse. The backside of this is such a big trampler, though. It's pretty worthwhile anyway, even if you're not sacrificing artifacts. So if you are in the Roka deck, I think this card is an amazing piece of removal. Can turn into, a couple of extra artifact creatures for you. So if you're in Roka, I'd say this card's handily a 3.5. If you're not Roka, at a minimum, you're going to get a 3/3 and deal 1 damage to an opponent's creature. And if you have a couple of stray other artifacts, it could do more than that. So it doesn't have no effect, but it would be greatly reduced. And then you might not have the easiest time flipping it over. So again, for other people, I'm going to say it's like a 2. Defense of the Breach Zone. Um, the text on this card just didn't want to lay right on the front or the back, but this is white, blue, black, red, and 3 colorless. So that's consortium colors. It is a battle siege. It's rare. It has 7 defense. That's a lot. When this enters the battlefield, you banish 2, exile up to 2 target non-land permanents. So that's strong. And you draw 2 cards at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep unless you control a forest. So as long as you're doing, the consortium thing here and you don't have a forest, you're going to exile 2 non-land permanents and you're going to draw 2 cards on the next upkeep. And you'll banish 2. This is incredibly powerful. Even though it's at 7 mana, it's well worth it. And then it's hard to flip. It takes 7 damage, but if you do, then you get Archmage Azilra the Imprisoned. So she is a legendary creature, merfolk wizard, 4/5 rare. And I think this multicolor indicator threw off the text here. I'm not able to change the size of it manually. It's supposed to auto-detect that. Anyway. She has Flying, Death Touch, and Menace. And you can pay 4 colorless, tap target non-land permanent and opponent controls and put a stun counter on it, or untap target non-land permanent you control. If you target the same permanent 2 or more times in one turn, exile it instead. So you can pay 8 to exile any target permanent by activating this twice. Or you can just throw around stun counters. Or you can very expensively untap your own non-land permanents. You can't make an infinite combo loop with it, though, because if you target the same one of your permanents twice, you're going to exile it. So this is an amazingly powerful card, especially when you get to 8 mana, and you're able to just start shooting down one thing every turn for free, basically. Even before you get to 8 mana, though, tapping things and putting stun counters at instant speed is pretty nasty. It takes a lot to flip the battle, but the front side gives you a lot. So I think it's worth it either way. And I would say this thing is a heck of a beating. The only reason I wouldn't rate it higher would just be that it has 4 colors of mana. And it does cost 7, and there's a practical limit on how many 7 drops you can play, but still. This is an incredibly powerful card, and I'm very tempted to give it a 4.5. Defense of the Monoliths. This is green, blue, red, and 2 colorless. Battle Siege. It's an uncommon. It has 5 defense. When Defense of the Monoliths enters the battlefield, you draw a card, create a quintessence token, then return up to 2 target creatures to their owner's hands. So you're bouncing things when you play this. You could bounce your own things for value. Most of the time, though, you're probably going to want to bounce an opponent's blockers out of the way so you can try to swing in and flip this thing over. So it's more of a tempo play. It does come with card advantage. You draw 1 card immediately. The quintessence token can draw you another card, which Quel'Nai cares about because they have a card draw matters theme. So what happens if you do flip it over? You get the Glowing Monolith, a colorless artifact. At the beginning of combat on your turn, draw a card. Then up to 1 target creature you control gets +X until end of turn, where X is the number of cards you have drawn this turn. Even without any help from being Quel'Nai, that should be at least +2/+2. And you're drawing an extra card every turn. So it's powerful, it's kind of clunky. You know, it's got a tempo play aspect to it where the opponent gets to play their creatures back out. But you're also getting up a bunch of cards. And if you flip it to the backside, this is a payoff and an enabler both for what Quel'Nai wants to be doing. If you are Quel'Nai, then I think this card's at least a 3. It's maybe a little clunkier than a couple of the other cards like this, but I think it's good still. And if you're not Quel'Nai, you could probably still put it to use. I don't think it's any worse than a 2 in that case. Defense of the Scrap Fields. This is a green, white, and blue. Battle Siege, uncommon. It has 3 defense. When it enters the battlefield, create a trash token. Then tap up to 1 target creature an opponent controls and put a number of stun counters on it equal to the number of trash tokens you control. So this is a Zarnik card that cares about trash tokens. It has some effect just because it'll put 1 trash token out anyway. So you can tap something and put at least 1 stun counter on it. And it doesn't take too much to flip this battle. So odds are you can swing in and get this thing flipped over. Most likely, unless the opponent's playing very defensively. When you flip it over, it turns into Hobbling Hordes. An artifact creature Pest. It is a 3/3. It has Bulwark 3, Rampage 3, and Trample. So Bulwark 3 means whenever this attacks, it gets +0/+3 until end of turn. So blocks as a 3/3, attacks as a 3/6 with Trample, but it also has Rampage 3. So for each creature that blocks it beyond the first, it gets +3/+3 until end of turn. So if one thing blocks your 3/6 Trampler, it doesn't get bigger, but if 2 things block it, you know, you'll start getting Rampage for every additional creature. So this is kind of a silly throwback, but at the same time, it's actually a surprisingly aggressive chunk of creature. This one's maybe not quite as impressive on the flip side as some of the other things. So if you're in Zarnik and you've been making trash tokens, you know, playing this out and tapping the opponent's thing and putting like 3 or more stun counters on it, that's pretty good. That takes it out of the fight for a long time. And then flipping this and getting another hefty presence on the battlefield is also decent. So if you're in Zarnik, I think you probably rate this at least a 3. If you're not in Zarnik, this is a lot more strange and clunky, and we'll call it a 2. Defense of Varansar. This is white, blue, black, red, and 2 colorless. So this is Consortium colors. It's Battle Siege, uncommon. It has 7 defense. So again, hard to flip over. When Defense of Varansar enters the battlefield, return up to 1 target artifact, enchantment, instant, or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. Then each opponent exiles a creature or planeswalker they control with the greatest mana value among creatures and planeswalkers they control. So this has got a sacrifice effect that aims at the opponent, and they have to get rid of their biggest creature or planeswalker. You, meanwhile, get to regrow a card from your graveyard, as long as it's an artifact, enchantment, instant, or sorcery. So there's a lot of value baked into this one. It is an expensive removal spell, but it's getting rid of their most expensive thing. So you don't feel too bad about that exchange. You also get card advantage because you're pulling back something from your graveyard. Probably another removal spell. Maybe a giant artifact creature. So it's a little clunky, but I think it's good value for the cost. I think this is at least a 3. And if you manage to flip it over, you get Archmage Ulnir the Recluse. So he's a white, blue, black, red legendary creature dwarf wizard. He's a 3/6. He has flying, lifelink, and ward 1. Whenever Ulnir attacks, exile target card from a graveyard. If that card was an artifact, enchantment, instant, or sorcery, you may cast a copy of it. Not for free. You have to use mana. As long as you control a forest, Ulnir gets -2/-2. So it's just another one of those little guardrail things where I'm encouraging you not to play with forests. If you're in this 4-color faction, don't play with the 5th color. So if you get Ulnir, he can start hating on graveyards and getting you value. And you can even be casting things that were from the opponent's graveyard. You can't do it for free, though. You have to actually use your mana. So the backside of the card is great. It's not easy to get there, but he'll definitely start winning you the game if you get him. So yeah, overall, I think this card is like a 3. It's just, there's a lot of mana requirement. There's a lot of clunkiness to it, but it's good effects all the way around. Defensive Whisperdown. So this is black, green, blue. We're looking at a Pax Dread card here. This is a Battle Siege, uncommon. It has 4 defense. When this enters the battlefield, each opponent banishes 3. Then up to 2 target creatures you control get +2/+0 and menace until end of turn. So this one is actually trying to sneak through your attackers to be able to flip the battle. Or, maybe just go face to win the game. I don't personally like that kind of design quite as well, but it's representing how the Pax Dread can be sneaky when they're in combat. So here where they've been pressed into a battle in war, this is kind of how they fight. They try to sneak through with menace. If you manage to flip this battle over, you get Bleak Revelation. So this is a green, blue, black sorcery. Each opponent discards a card, then you create 2 Quintessence tokens. So that is technically a bunch of card advantage. You could sack those Quintessence tokens later to draw cards. So Bleak Revelation could put you up by 3 cards. You can also use the Quintessence for a burst of colorless mana. So it's not bad, it's a good effect. I would say this card's not quite as much of a sure thing. It's a little bit clunkier. So not everything can be the best battle. I think it's still worthy of being a 2.5. Yeah, we'll go with a 2.5. Disturbing Dreams. This is green, blue, red. Enchantment at uncommon. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player may have you draw a card. If they do not, you create a 1/1 colorless nightmare creature token. So this is kind of telling a story, right? This is the idea that you're asleep while the opponent's taking their turn, but things are manifesting while your sleep is being disturbed by these presences from the Far Realm and from Thune. So it's better in a multiplayer game because you have more opponents with more upkeeps. But I still think it could play a role, especially in Limited. If your opponent knows what they're doing, unless they're about to win the game, they won't choose for you to draw cards. Instead, you'll be making a nightmare creature token on their turn. So most of the time, this is going to be giving you a free creature every turn cycle. Unless the opponent thinks that they can like sneak through and finish you off, and they don't want you to have a blocker that turn. But if you're able to, use a spell and stop that combat, then you can get card advantage in that situation. It's mostly just a token producing card for Quel'Nai colors. And I think it's very fair to have like a 3-mana enchantment that makes it 1/1 every turn cycle. And it's better in, games like Commander and big multiplayer free-for-alls and stuff. For limited, I think this card is fine, and I would call it probably around 3. Far Realm Creeper. This is blue, black, red, green, and 2. We have a creature, plant horror. It is a 7/6 rare. It has haste, lifelink, and reach. When this enters, you breach. So you shuffle your library, banish the top card. If it's a land, you put it onto the battlefield. If it's a spell, you cast it without paying its mana cost. And as long as you control planes, Far Realm Creeper gets -4, -0. So don't go 5 colors. If you're in the 4-color faction, stay in 4 colors. Don't go 5. I'm trying to give these color groupings some identity of their own. So this is, I would say if you're trying to do the Breach deck in Constructed, this is one of your key cards because it has haste. Most of the creatures that have Breach don't have haste. This one does. So this is going to be one of the absolutely key cards to crush your opponent. If you get lucky and hit a couple of these off of breaches, then you can swing across with these giant hasty lifelinkers. That would be a huge tempo swing in the game. In Limited, I think the presence of this thing on the battlefield and the breach that it brings is going to be crushing. I think this is a bomb. If it had trample, it would be absurd. As it is, I still think this card is pushing up towards the range of 4.5. It maybe gets dinged a little bit and take a half a point off for its mana cost, but this is absurdly powerful. Far Realm Instigator. This is blue, black, red, and green. So 4 mana, 4 different colors. Creature Horror. It is an uncommon 6/3. It has Menace and Trample. Whenever you flip a coin or resolve a spell or ability that uses the word random or randomly in its rules text, breach. This ability triggers only once each turn and only during your turn. So I had to be pretty cautious with giving a breach payoff because of just how strong breach is. That being said, I still think it's worth trying to build towards this. If you're the Far Realm deck and you're trying to get the payoffs and what that deck cares about, grabbing up some of the coin flip and random cards of the format, building towards this guy to where it can start getting you free lands and spells off your library is a really nice payoff. It's a little fragile with only 3 toughness, but it's aggressive, it's hard to block, and it has a fantastic payoff ability if it manages to live. So I think if you're trying to trigger it, if you're trying to build for this deck, then yeah, this is probably like a 3.5. It's something you want to build towards. And if you're just kind of making a random good stuff deck across like 5 colors or whatever, this is more forgettable. It's just kind of a big body. And at that point, You know, maybe it's only like a 2 or a 2.5. It's like it's big, but it's not very defensive. It's very likely that if you block something, this will have a good chance of dying from a combat trick or otherwise. So I think it's good for the deck that wants it and kind of mediocre otherwise. Golem Reconstructor. This is red, green, white, and 2 colorless. Artifact Creature Golem. It is a rare. It's a 4/3. Has lifelink. When it enters the battlefield, you may return up to one target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. If you don't, create a 3/3 colorless Golem artifact creature token. So one of the things about the Roka Guild with this 3-color pairing is if you like to beat down, if that's how you like to win the game, or if you like artifacts, I guess, Roka has some of the most meaty creatures, some of the most power and toughness you'll see on any card comes out of Roka. So they like to go big. Their creatures can go tall. They can also go a little bit wide. They're really all in on flooding the board with artifact creatures, making them big, and beating down. So if you're looking for, where's the aggro deck in the format, look just a little bit bigger than normal. Instead of looking for the 1-drops and stuff, look more mid-range. And you can be beating down with giant stuff from Roka and taking down the opponents before they get to their, huge 7-mana, 9-mana late game plays. As for this card, it's amazing. If you don't return an artifact from your graveyard, you get 7 power and 6 toughness. 4 of it lifelink on the power for 5 mana. That's really good. Or you get a perfectly fine body and you get value by pulling an artifact back from your graveyard, if that would be better. I would say this is a card that pulls you strongly in the direction of Roka, and it's got to be at least a 4. It's so good. Insane Revelations. This is blue, black, red, green. Rare instant. You banish 6. That's exiling the top 6 cards of your library. Then you flip a coin 3 times. For each flip you win, put 2 of the exiled cards into your hand. Then if you control a plains, discard 3 cards. So don't do that. Don't control a plains. Stick to the 4 colors. This is a very powerful card draw spell. It's essentially random. It has a chance of whiffing, where you don't win any of the flips and then you're just 6 cards into exile. That would be terrible. There's also the equally unlikely chance that you win all 3 flips. That's the thing to bear in mind. People like to think about the fail state of the card, but it's just as likely as the fail state that you would draw 6 off of this. Neither of those are likely scenarios. What's much more likely to happen is that you will put 2 or 4 cards into your hand out of your top 6 and banish the others into exile. And for 4 mana at instant speed, that's pretty good. I would say that's good enough that control decks in Standard would seriously consider looking at that. So even though it's unreliable, it's potent. That's exactly the kind of card that Spike hates. Because Spike hates randomness. Spike likes to feel like his skill won the game. I'm taking some big risks in the design of this set. But I thought it would be fun to embrace the craziness of the Far Realm in this way. So I think the spell is good, actually. There there's only so much you want to rate a card draw spell in limited. It keeps getting more and more so that you need to care about battlefield presence. That being said, if you've got some instant speed removal, if you've got some counter spells, some flash creatures, basically if you can be holding mana open on the opponent's turn to beneficial effect, then this is going to be great. Even if you just get 2 out of those 6 cards into your hand, those are going to be 2 very good cards. So I would give this probably a 3.5. You know, I think it's very strong. It's unreliable. It's very swingy. But I think it will serve you pretty well if you can cast it. Internecine Modulation. This is green, white, and blue. It is a rare enchantment. When Internecine Modulation enters the battlefield, create a Power Stone token and a Trash token. So Power Stones are from the Brothers' War. It's a colorless artifact named Power Stone. It has tap, add colorless. The mana can't be spent to cast a non-artifact spell. So if it's a spell, it needs to be an artifact. Otherwise, you know, activated abilities, triggered abilities, whatnot, knock yourself out. And a Trash token is a colorless artifact token named Trash with pay 1, tap, sacrifice this artifact, mill 1, then surveil 1. This enchantment also has pay 1, sacrifice a Trash token, exile target token. So this is a Zarnik Trash payoff card that lets you pick on the opponent's tokens. Since you're having to come down on your Trash tokens, this feels fair. Because you care about your Trash tokens too, you are coming down meaningfully on your game plan when you use this. But at the same time, you could force the opponent to blow up a bunch of quintessence tokens or something that's more valuable than a Trash token, and maybe not be able to draw all the cards they were wanting to draw in the meantime. So there are a lot of tokens in this format, and there's token creatures and things as well. Some of them are even as big as 6/6 worms. So this is kind of a techie, weird rare, but I feel like it could have some play in limited as well. So constructed, it kind of depends on the format, whether it ends up being main deckable or a sideboard card. In limited, I think there's enough targets for this that you're happy to run it. Also, it's giving you a Power Stone token and a Trash token, and if you're in Zarnik, the Trash token's good, and you probably, have enough activated abilities and artifacts in your deck. The Power Stone token's going to be good for you too. So I think this card for Zarnik is probably around a 2.5. I would say it's worth the trouble most of the time. Invasion of Veldmar. So the invaders get the invasion word on their battles, and the defenders get the defense word on their battles. Makes sense, right? So Invasion of Veldmar is blue, black, red, green. It's a Far Realm card. It's a battle siege, uncommon, has 6 defense. When it enters the battlefield, you create 2 3/1 black horror creature tokens. Then flip a coin unless you control a plains. Don't do that. Don't control a plains. Stick to your colors. If you win the flip, those creatures gain haste and trample until end of turn. So you could play this battle down and get these creatures that could be able to attack that turn and try to flip that battle if you win the coin flip. It's still putting out 6 power worth of stuff for 4 mana, which is fine. If you manage to flip this battle, you get Unstable Portal. It's an artifact at the beginning of your upkeep. Breach. That is Excellent. You're either getting a free land or a free spell every upkeep. And of course, that's good. That's an incredibly powerful backside on the card, and the front side is fine. It gives you 2 creatures, 6 power. So I would say this card's, probably right around a 3.5. Worth the trouble to try to include. So if you can cast it, that's pretty good. Invasive Plane. This uses hybrid mana. So it uses black or red plus green or blue. So it's a 2-mana sorcery at uncommon. You and target opponent both banish 1. You may play cards exiled this way for as long as they remain exiled. You may play an additional land this turn. If you do, that land enters the battlefield tapped with a stun counter on it. So this is a powerful card. And most of the factions, maybe literally all the factions, should be able to cast it. This double hybrid casting cost is actually incredibly flexible. So a little bit less so if you have white in the mix with your mana base, but still. Just about every color combination in Defense of Veldmar, one way or another, can get to this card. Now, even though you can play the cards while they remain exiled, you do not get to spend mana as though it's mana of any color. That's a restriction on the card you should pay attention to. Obviously, the card you get off your deck is going to be fine. You might get a land off of the opponent's deck, which, if you're in the Far Realm and you flip a Plains off of their deck, you might think twice about actually playing that Plains. Mostly, though, this card just has an absurd amount of value baked into it, and even though the extra land drop gets a stun counter, I'd say it's still well worth it. So this is an incredibly flexible and powerful card, and I think it's a 4. Junkyard Armory. This is green, white, and blue. This is a rare enchantment. When Junkyard Armory enters the battlefield, create a trash token. And trash tokens you control are equipment with equip 1, and equipped creature gets +1/+1. So this is fun. This is one of those kind of Zarnik cards where you just come out of left field and suddenly all of your stupid trash tokens are now equipment that you can move around for 1 mana, and you can make your creatures gigantic. And if the opponent's not expecting it, it could be just an enormous swing in your favor that they can't come back from. It's not the worst defensively either. Being able to move all this equipment around very cheaply can bolster your creatures into effective blockers. So I think this is very well worth it. It also comes with a trash token as well. So if you're Zarnik, I think this card is pretty amazing and might rate as high as a 4. If you're not the Zarnik, it depends on how many trash tokens you have. It's not worth it if this is the only trash token, just the one that the enchantment makes. So depends very greatly on the composition of your deck if you're not Zarnik. It could be as bad as a 1, or maybe even a 0, if you really don't have the support for it. Memories Restored. This is black, green, and blue. It is rare instant. Target player shuffles up to 13 cards they own from outside the game, not exile, into their library. You draw 2 cards at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So this is a story beat moment where Zeldrava is giving back the memories, basically unlocking the part of Valadra's mind that she had locked away. Because they need this powerful Archmage spellcaster in order to try to help repel the invasion and lead the consortium to gather the factions together to work together. So, as far as what the card does, it's interesting. It's always at least going to be a draw 2 for 3 mana. You don't get them immediately, but you can cast it at the end of the opponent's turn and then have access to them on your upkeep. And that's pretty good. You can also bring cards in to your library from your sideboard. And that's interesting. In Constructed, you've got a 15-card sideboard. It's like, well, do you need them for the matchup? Maybe it would be interesting to shuffle them in. You've got a chance of drawing them. And in Limited, all the cards that you did not put into your deck from the draft are your sideboard, technically. And so in Limited, you also have this interesting spot where you can choose to shuffle in a bunch of extra cards if they're good for the matchup. I think this is a fine spell. It's a fine rate of card draw. It has an interesting niche application with your sideboard. So for Limited, I'm going to rate this right around a 2.5. Pax Dread doesn't have the Card Draw Matters theme, but I still think this is a pretty interesting card that would make the cut a lot of the time. Mind's Bite. This is green, blue, red, instant, rare. Draw 2 cards. Then up to 1 target creature you control gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is equal to the number of cards you've drawn this turn. That creature deals damage equal to its power to up to 1 target creature you don't control. So, if you're doing this on your turn, you've drawn a card for the turn, you get into combat, you draw 2 cards, you give something +3/+3, and then you get a bite effect, where it hits the opponent's creature equal to its power. That is a lot of benefits going on this 3 mana instant. Now, the opponent has the potential to blow you out, if they can do a removal spell in response. Then you might be in some trouble there. But this card does so much stuff at this mana cost that I think it's a pretty extreme swing in your favor. And I think it's at least worthy of a 3.5. Nulvir Doomsayer. So this is a black plus a green or a white. Hybrid mana. So it's a 2 mana human warlock, a 2/1 uncommon. When Nulvir Doomsayer enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white human creature token. You can also pay 1, sacrifice a creature, and surveil 1. So this is a glue piece for the Nulvir. They have the aristocrat sacrifice thing going on. So this card brings 2 bodies with it, and it brings a sacrifice outlet. And it has Surveil, which can put things into the graveyard, and the Nulvir have a little bit more of a graveyard theme in defense of Veldmar. So this card's just kind of a workhorse. Just a little good 2 mana enabler that's trying to check all the boxes for the Nulvir. And I would say if you're in Nulvir, in Limited, this card is going to be great for you. It's probably rates about a 3.5. If you're anybody else, as long as you can cast it, it's pretty good value for you as a 2-drop, and I'd say it's probably about a 3. Paxdread Mindlink. This is black, green, and blue. It's an uncommon enchantment. Creatures you control get +0/+1, reach, and ward, banish 1. So in order to target one of your creatures, the player has to exile the top card of their library. So the Pax Dread care about milling out the opponent. So they take a defensive bent with their cards. They kind of wall up, and they try to establish ways that the opponent's going to mill themselves out. In this case, your creatures are tougher, they can block flyers, and in order to target them, you're nickel and diming their library away. So if you're in Pax Dread, this card is carrying your main theme pretty well. The first copy of it's probably pretty good. And call it at least like a 3 for the first copy of it if you're Pax Dread. If you're not Pax Dread, it's more like a Spider Silk Armor, which is not bad. Giving reach to everything's decent, and an extra point of toughness is pretty welcome. So, for anyone who's not Pax Dread, it's probably at least a 2. Planar Debris Web. So this is white, blue, black, red, green, and 5 mana. This is actually all 5 colors. It is a mythic rare legendary enchantment. When Planar Debris Web enters the battlefield, choose up to 2 opponents. Whenever a permanent enters the battlefield under a chosen opponent's control, that player sacrifices a permanent. Whenever a chosen opponent draws a card, that player must discard a card or sacrifice a permanent. So the flavor of this card is this is what they came up with in order to bind the Far Realm and Thune in order to stop their spread. They used the trash of Veldmar, all of the debris and waste of their war and industry, and they linked it together like the Hedron network of Zendikar. The Zarnik artificers were finding all these uses for trash and the resonances of mana that trash has a frequency with. And then Pax Dread Scions and Quelnai researchers worked with them and found a way to turn this into something similar to the Hedron network, which is kind of ridiculous. But it feels like Veldmar. Only Veldmar could recycle their trash into something that would capture an Eldrazi Titan. So in terms of its gameplay effect, 10 mana is a lot. It does not instantly win you the game, but it does mean that for any opponent chosen by this, they cannot be up on permanents, and they cannot be up on cards. Whatever they have at the moment you cast this, that is the number of permanents they are able to play with for the rest of the game. And they're not going to be able to get more cards in their hand unless they can do so without drawing. If they can put cards directly into their hand, that would still work. But otherwise, they're hobbled on the number of permanents and cards they can have for forever, unless they can get rid of this. And that can be pretty backbreaking. It could be obviously incredibly unfun if you were able to trick this card into play early in the game. That would just be like unplayable nonsense that would win you the game. So if there ends up being some combo where a player figures out how to do that, then I guess that might get this card banned. Otherwise, it costs so much mana, and it doesn't immediately impact the opponent's board position. I don't know that it's really that good, outside of like giant multiplayer formats and stuff. And even then, you can only pick 2 of your opponents. So, in Limited, I don't know that this is necessarily worth the trouble. And you have to go into all 5 colors to do it. So I think this card might be a trap. And I would say that you shouldn't take it in Limited. And probably for that reason, the card is more like a 0. it has powerful text on the card, but what it forces you to do, um, and how it doesn't immediately impact their board when it comes down, I think it's not good for limited. It might be interesting for commander though. So yeah, I would say in limited, don't play this card. Prototype Hanger. This is a green, a white, and a blue, and one colorless. Or generic. You know what I mean. It's an uncommon artifact. Whenever one or more cards are exiled from your library, put a +1/+1 counter on target vehicle you control. There are a couple of vehicles in the set, but also this card makes vehicles. You can tap and sacrifice 2 trash tokens. You create a 4/4 colorless artifact vehicle token named Junk Engine that has crew 1. So if you haven't actually played with a vehicle before, you crew it by tapping creatures that have that amount of power. So in this case, 1. And it becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. So this card plays around both with the trash tokens that you get to turn into vehicles, and with the theme of self-banish, where you're exiling cards from your own library. In this case, you get to put counters on vehicles. If you are Zarnik, then I think this card is quite strong. If you are Zarnik, I think this could be every bit of a 3.5. You know, it's a little bit of a build around, but it's the things that you're encouraged to do anyway for the Zarnik color grouping. So if you're not Zarnik, this could just be unplayable and might rate a 0 in that case. Ramshackle War Machine. This is a red, green, and white rare artifact vehicle. It's a 1/5. It has reach, trample, and vigilance. Whenever another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Ramshackle War Machine. And crew 1. So it's easy to crew, has high toughness. It attacks with vigilance, so you can crew it again to block on the opponent's turn if you need. And getting a +1 counter whenever any artifact enters the battlefield under your control, there are a lot of ways to get artifact tokens in this set. And if you get this down early, this should explode with +1 counters pretty quickly if you've built your deck the right way. So if you're in Roka, or like Roka plus Zarnik, then you're going to get a ton of +1 counters on this thing, and it's going to be a great finisher for you. So I would say this could be as much as a 4 if you're in the deck that wants it. And if you're just building a random good stuff deck, you can't necessarily trigger it, then this would be an extremely forgettable card and might only be like a 1.5. Roka Assault Golem. So this is a red, green, white, and 1. We have an artifact creature golem. It's uncommon. It's a 4/5. It has reach and vigilance. And you can tap 3 untapped artifacts you control and deal 1 damage to target opponent. So this is a well-statted creature for its mana cost. In addition to that, it has what they call reach, not the kind that blocks flyers, but the kind where you can reach out and damage the opponent even after the board is gummed up. So it's a win condition for a couple of reasons. It's going to be very, very good in Roka, where you're making all your artifact tokens. And it's a good-sized creature even outside of Roka. So Roka probably rates this card like a 3.5 at least. And outside of Roka, if you can cast it, It's probably at least a 3.0. Seldra, Nulvir Marauder. So white, black, green, and 1. Legendary creature, Gorgon Warlock. She is a 4/4 mythic rare. She has Death Touch, Lifelink, and Menace. When Seldra enters, you may sacrifice a creature. If you do, each opponent sacrifices a non-token creature. Whenever you sacrifice a creature, return target non-creature permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. This ability triggers only once each turn. So, she's in the Aristocrat's colors, and she does it all. She comes down as an extremely efficient package of a creature. Death Touch, Lifelink, and Menace on a 4/4 for 4 is a lot. She can sacrifice something when she first comes down and make the opponent sacrifice something that's not a token. And that will trigger her other ability that'll pull a non-creature permanent back from your graveyard to your hand. And then this continues to be something you can do once each turn with your Aristocrat stack. So she has a ton of card advantage baked in on top of being a very formidable body in combat. Seldra is ridiculously good, and I'm going to give her a 4.5. Stolen Dreams. This is black, green, and blue, a rare enchantment. Whenever one or more cards are exiled from an opponent's library, that player may pay 2. If they do not, you create a Quintessence token. This ability triggers only once per opponent per turn. So, if that leaves you a little bit confused about what this does, basically, if you were able to exile a card from each player's library on the opponent's turn, each person who had a card exiled could pay 2 to stop you from getting a Quintessence token. And then on the next turn, if you're able to exile a card from everyone's library again, they would all need to pay 2 again to stop you from getting a Quintessence token. Now, it's not that easy to be able to exile a card from everyone's library at instant speed on each player's turn, but I figure this card is a build around that could find its way into a commander deck. It's probably not terrible in limited. If you play this out and you're exiling cards from the opponent, and also, incidentally, some of their cards might require them to exile cards themselves from their library. And this could be quite a tax on them that can either prevent them from playing things or slow them down a lot, or they're just giving you tons of Quintessence, which is getting you ahead on mana and cards. So, it's kind of clunky, but I think it would actually trigger a lot in the limited format of Defensive Veldmar and Veldmar block in general. So I think it's playable. I don't think it's just garbage. You just have to kind of play around with it a bit and try to time it to where the opponent can't pay the tax, or you're taxing them at a moment where you think they'd rather play something else. It's not amazing, and the opponent sees it coming. So I think I'm going to give it a 2.5 if you're in Pax Dread. If you're not in Pax Dread, it's probably a 0. Teachings of Nicol Bolas. This is more of a constructed card, but let's go ahead and read it here. It has 2 hybrid mana, white or blue, plus black or red. So it's consortium colors, no green. It is a rare enchantment. Whenever Teachings of Nicol Bolas enters, or you cast a non-creature spell with mana cost 5 or more, banish 1, Then put the exiled card into your hand if it's a non-creature spell. So, triggers when it comes in, triggers when you cast large non-creature spells. It'll put the card into your hand if it's any non-creature spell, not just the big expensive ones. It's probably tricky to use in limited. Normally you run a lot of creatures in a limited deck, so getting this to fire consistently in limited is probably difficult. Won't come up very often. So generally speaking, in limited, I would say this is not a card that you run most of the time. Probably around a 0. If you do have a weird limited deck that doesn't have that many creatures in it, then this could be a great engine piece for you. But I think that would come up kind of rarely. I think it's more of a constructed card. Telrun Moxnull, Field Researcher. So if you've heard me read the story from Wastes of Veldmar, I put out a video a while back. This is Telrun from that story. Is a green and a blue, legendary creature, Human Artificer. He is a 1/3 rare. When Telrun enters the battlefield, search your library for an artifact card with mana cost 5 or more. Reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. And he can tap to add colorless or 1 mana of any color. So Telrun is just a really helpful mana creature that can also fetch up an expensive artifact for you. So he's just handy all the way around. If you have access to these colors, then he's going to fix your mana. He can even let you play colorless spells, or let you splash into other colors. And finding a big artifact is just a very handy, flexible thing to do. This card's good all the way around without being busted in any way. So I would say in the limited format that as long as you have 1 or 2 artifacts that cost 5 or more in your deck, he's going to be great. He's going to be like a 3.5, and if you don't have any artifacts like that, but you still have access to these colors, he's a decently statted mana creature at 2, and he would still probably be like a 3. Ulthrak Elder. This is black, red, green, creature, orc, druid. She is a 3/4 rare. She has reach and vigilance, and tap, add black, red, green. This is a really good creature. She's simple, not hard to understand, but she's got a good stat line. She fights well enough on her own with vigilance and reach, and on top of that, she takes you right up to 6 mana. So if you're doing the Ulthrak thing, this is letting you hit your 6+ mana creatures. But she's good enough that I think if you have access to these colors, you're going to play the card. So if you're Ulthrak, she's especially good. And she probably rates like 4.5 if you're actually in the Ulthrak deck. And if you're not in the Ulthrak deck, but you have access to these colors, then let's call her like 3.5 in that case. Wrathful Gnarlwood. So this is black, red, green, and 4. So 7 mana. For a creature, Treefolk Berserker. As a 7/7 mythic rare. Has Menace, Reach, and Trample. And when Wrathful Gnarlwood enters the battlefield, choose 1. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. Deal 5 damage to any target and you gain 5 life. Or create a 6/6 green worm creature token with Trample. So this can be a removal spell with life gain, artifact or enchantment destruction, or it could give you 13 power and toughness of trampling creatures. and I think that makes this card good. In Limited, I think it's especially good. I think this is kind of an absurd bomb. In Limited, I'd rate it around a 4.5. Wormwrecker. This is black, red, green, and 3 colorless. It's an uncommon worm, 6/6, has lifelink and reach. Whenever Wormwrecker enters the battlefield or you cast a creature spell with mana cost 6 or more, destroy up to 1 target token permanent, and each opponent loses 2 life. You can also channel it, pay a green and 1, discard it. You banish cards until you reveal a land card, then put that card onto the battlefield tapped. So this is fantastic if you're Ulthrak. Early in the game, it can ramp you mana by hitting your next land and putting it right onto the battlefield. Late in the game, it's a fantastic 6-drop that triggers the things that your deck wants to be doing, and it has a payoff for additional 6-drop creatures that you play. So if you're in Ulthrak, this card's like a 4. It's just amazing for you. And if you're not in Ulthrak, but you still have access to the colors, it's still excellent and probably is a 3.5. Xyliris, Cryptozoologist. This is a green, blue, red, and 1. Legendary creature, Gorgon Wizard. This is a 2/4 mythic rare. He has Death Touch, Haste, and Vigilance. He cannot be blocked by creatures that share a creature type with a creature you control. That's the cryptozoologist part. He studies creatures and biology, especially strange ones. And so he can't be blocked by things that he understands, that he's seen before. He also has tap, draw a card. So this is a great creature. He plays offense and defense for you. He can come in immediately with haste. He can tap to draw a card with his haste. He has vigilance. So you have him available to block during the opponent's turn. He has death touch, so he's hard to tangle with in combat. It's just a great package of abilities. And on top of all of that, Quel'Nai College has the theme of card draw matters, which he can trigger at instant speed just by tapping. If you're in Quel'Nai, he's going to be a fabulous card for you. He's going to be like a 4.5, and even if you're not in Quel'Nai, but you have access to the colors, he's great. What's not to like? It'd be like a 4. And finally, we see Zeldrava, Planeswalker. So we met Zeldrava in Wastes of Veldmar as a legendary creature, but now her spark has ignited, and she's traveling with the Raven Man, who, spoiler alert, if you don't know this from Liliana's story, he is Limdul the Necromancer. So for the moment, she's working with him. So this is a 3-mana walker, black, green, blue. Legendary Planeswalker Zeldrava. She's mythic rare. She has 4 loyalty. She has +1. Create a 1/1 blue illusion creature token that has, at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice this creature. So she can protect herself with her plus ability, but the creature doesn't stick around. -2, target opponent banishes 3. Choose one of those cards. You may play that card as long as it remains exiled. So this is her Pax Dread showing, where she chips away at their library, and also she steals their thoughts. And then -3. Target opponent puts 2 cards from their hand on top of their library. Then that player may banish 7. So the option for them to banish 7 gets them out of being soft-locked out of the game, where they keep seeing the same cards over and over again off the top of their library, and they can't find new cards, and maybe they can't get lands. The banish 7 means they can get rid of the stuff on top of their library. but that also means it's playing into your strategy of milling them out. So it's cruel either way. If they don't go for the Banish 7, then you've not only made them discard 2, they don't have access to it in their graveyard, and you've set them back on seeing fresh cards. So I think Zeldrova is a pretty good Planeswalker. I think she's entirely fair at 3 mana without being busted. You can activate her -2 twice in a row if you just want to like draw 2 cards and chip away at the opponent's library a bit. You can be plussing her, and the opponent will be, wasting their resources trying to throw attacks at Zeldrova, and she keeps putting a fresh illusion creature in the way as a chump blocker. There's a lot of ways that I think she can be useful, and I think she'll be pretty great in Limited. So I would rate her right around a 4. If you have access to her, then I think you go ahead and play her. And that brings us to the end of Multicolor. One quick note I want to add about Multicolor. If you thought that some of these cards are more blatantly powerful than some of the things we saw in Monocolor, that has to do with the limited environment, oddly enough. That might sound crazy, but one of the problems with Streets of New Capenna was that the Multicolor cards were a little more lackluster, and some of the monocolor, two-color pairings of the format were far more powerful. And I didn't want that to happen here. I wanted there to be an extremely strong draw into playing the gold cards, into establishing the lanes of the format, and giving you a reason to go into 3 and 4 colors. And the reason is, the cards are flat good. You're giving up a lot of power by not playing them. So if it feels like they're stronger, there's a reason for that. And that is to keep the limited format on track. Next time we're going to be looking at colorless, and starting with the cards that require the colorless mana symbol. So that'll be Thune's faction. After that, we'll look at artifacts, and then we'll wrap up on lands. So stay tuned to see all the rest of Defense of Veldmar. Please like and subscribe. Check out my other videos. It helps the channel a lot. And until next time, never stop honing your critical thinking and empathy.